Okay, so let's do our blessing for learning and then we'll dive right in. So the blessing for learning is Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvot b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us sacred by commanding us to do better with our lives, by committing us to the covenant, and by so doing also commanding us to engage in the business of learning. And it is interesting, recently I studied in the Talmud, actually last week, before we left the tractate of Shabbat, that there is no explicit prohibition in Torah against doing business on Shabbat. And this is very interesting. So it's only a rabbinic prohibition. It's only a Talmud prohibition. It's not a Torah prohibition. And what that means is that in the Talmud, they explicitly say that business that is designated as quote unquote not-for-profit for the welfare of the community is allowed on Shabbat. So not only that, you can have conversations about organizing things for the community on Shabbat as well. In any event, the business of our learning today, my advertised topic today was Jewish mysticism. And there is a wonderful way into Jewish mysticism via Hasidism, right? A short history. Jewish mysticism, as we've talked about in these sessions, really starts with the advent of Jews trying to connect with the divine in a post-miracle world. So if we accept that all of Judaism really takes place after God stops intervening in things, right? So we no longer have God intervening in the universe, and therefore we do have, hi Ethel, and therefore instead of an interventionist God, we have a God with whom we partner. So that is the presumption of a post-miraculous world, which is all of Judaism takes place in a post-miraculous world. So Jewish mysticism is an attempt to bring together Jews and the divine in a more tangible way, via prayer, via meditation, all of these things. The earliest attempts to do this start with, the earliest written attempts start with an attempt to use the encounter between Ezekiel and God in the chariot in the first chapter of Ezekiel as a map, a roadmap to connect with God, which is a very interesting idea. The continuation of that extends into extends into what eventually becomes the heyday of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism, which is the Middle Ages and the writing of the Zohar in the 1200s. The Zohar opens this up. The Zohar is a whole other topic which we can talk about at length, but the most modern and contemporary manifestations of Jewish mysticism start with Hasidut or Hasidism. And Hasidism is started by Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, who is known as the Baal Shem Tov, the possessor of the good name, who is a teacher of Kabbalistic secrets, mystical secrets, to a small cohort of students. And they, in turn, start spreading these teachings into a popular idea. And their spreading of the teachings into a popular idea turns into what we now know, it spreads into Hasidism in Eastern Europe. What is interesting to me about this is because these Hasidic teachers are taking the insights of Jewish mysticism public, which had not been done before, they're also attempting to make them approachable. Most Jewish mysticism up until that point had been highly esoteric. It had been transmitted only to the best students by the most elite teachers. It had been a secret group. And It was the Baal Shem Tov in expanding the student group and then his students in expanding it and taking the teachings to everyone that attempted to create almost a humanist mysticism. And so when we talk about Hasidism here in this group, I am not so much talking about your neighborhood Lubavitcher rabbi or Rebbe who is Hasidic, or the Satmars in a exclusive community. What we are talking about is the tradition of really taking Jewish mysticism and making it into something that we can use. So the text that we're going to start with today is a text from a teacher of mine, and I'm sorry it's not the best copy of it, but and I will see if I can make it larger so that we can all see it well, since my eyes have also gotten old. There we go. Hopefully that's visible. So this is from a book called Speaking Torah. It is written by, compiled by a teacher of mine named Rabbi Arthur Green, who is one of the world's foremost authorities on Hasidism. And so for example, this section at the top of the page here, Mavasa Tzedek, that is a collection of stories and writings by a Hasidic teacher. And the Hasidic teacher, Mavasser Tzedek is written in 1796, and it is the accumulation of teachings by someone named Yisachar Dov of Zlochau, who died in 1795. So this is a very early Hasidic text. It's influenced by both the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid. The Maggid is the primary student of the Baal Shem Tov who wrote down all of these things. He quotes frequently from other students as well. He moved to Tzfat in Israel shortly before he died. So this is who we're talking about. But he is writing a commentary on Shoftim. What's Shoftim? Shoftim is this week's Torah reading. So we are, in fact, looking at this week's Torah portion as a way of getting into a central idea of Hasidism and Jewish mysticism. And so here is, and this way of reading Torah is particularly Kabbalistic, particularly mystically inspired. Why is it particularly mystically inspired? Because it says that in each and every section of the Torah, we can find something meaningful, something deeper that's underneath the surface. Maimonides almost was one of the articulators of this method by saying that the Torah exists on many levels, that on the surface, it exists for teaching basic things for the basic readers. But under the surface, it has many messages, and that those messages are there for those who dive into it. So here's the opening. This is from Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 6 through 7. It is straight from this week's Torah reading. When a Levite comes forth from one of your gates, where he dwells amid all Israel, coming filled with desire to the place Adonai has chosen, he shall serve in the name of Adonai your God, like all his brother Levites who stand before Adonai. So this seems like a relatively mundane passage, right? Looking at this passage, when a Levite comes forth from one of the gates, meaning here's a Levite. The Levite doesn't necessarily dwell in the center of things, isn't in the temple. That's a great question. So Bob asked me to define what mysticism is. All right, mysticism in 2 minutes or less. The goal of mysticism is to find out really what God wants of us, or to commune directly with God, or to have, in a more secular idea, a profoundly meaningful experience. So our stereotypical image of a mystic, someone meditating on their own on a mountaintop, is not the Jewish version of a mystic. A Jewish mystic is somebody who uses their insights to the way the world works, to the way God asks of us things, to make the world better, which is why in previous discussions I have said that one can't be a Jewish mystic without also being a mensch. We have to be righteous agents in the world in accord with the mystical insights that we've found. Furthermore, a Jewish mystic in particular, Jewish mysticism does not define who we are, theologically or liturgically. In other words, a Jewish mystic doesn't say, I know the absolute universal idea about what God is, that my mystical experience is absolute or universal. Rather, I've had a special experience, and we can talk about my special experience so that each of us might share what our own special experiences are. This is very different, right? I don't get to be a proselytizing mystic. I don't get to say, I had this fantastic experience of divine revelation, and I'm going to give it to you directly. Because we are not identical. And there is no way that two people can have the same profound, unique experience of mystery. And Bob, to conclude sort of my quick definition, my idea is that mysticism is looking into mystery, quite simply. Okay, so here, this mundane passage in Deuteronomy, which is, for all intents and purposes, saying there's a Levite, he doesn't dwell in the temple. The Levite wants to go to the temple, and there he gets to go and work with all his other brother Levites. Now, this may be, if we are looking at the surface, addressing a question that comes later on in the monarchy of Israel. In the first monarchy, there are Levites who don't live in Jerusalem next to the temple. And here it says, a Levite can come and join the Levite group that run the temple. Okay, nice. But doesn't seem to have any deeper meaning. So here is our teacher from the Mavaser Tzedek saying, elsewhere, I have interpreted the Mishnah's statement, pray for the welfare, for the shalom of the government. Okay, so now the Mishnah, right, is a 2nd century document. Here's the quote. It's from Pirkei Avot. And it says, pray for the welfare for the shalom, for the peace of the government. And this is a basic thing that the Mishnah was written at a time when the Jews were living under Rome, and the Romans were not always friendly to the Jews, and still the Mishnah is saying we should get along with the authorities. However, our teacher here says, no, we don't read it that way. We read it as pray for the wholeness of Malchut, the 10th Sfirah. So remember, a couple weeks ago, we talked about Sfirot, and Malchut is the most basic of them, the place where we encounter the world. It is the world of action. So here, our Hasidic teacher here is saying, no, this has nothing to do with government, Malchut. It has to do with Malchut, rulership, the Sfirah. It's a mystical teaching. What does it mean? There are two essential qualities in serving God, awe and love. The Zohar describes these as the two wings that allow prayer to fly upward. So we're looking at awe and love. This seems difficult to understand. Wouldn't it be best to serve God purely with love and passion? But the truth is that love alone can bring you to the dissolution of self, your own life force swallowed up in the root. You need awe in order to tamp down love's passion. Now this is very interesting, I think. We don't serve God merely by giving of ourselves, by loving and pouring ourselves out. Why? Because we lose ourselves. To serve God with nothing but love, to love the divine, is to allow ourselves to be swallowed up in God. That God is too big to do that. We can't actually love God that way without losing ourselves. That's having a mystical experience and being subsumed. One of the dangers inherent in Jewish mysticism is that to experience true unity with the divine is to die. And that's not our purpose. Our purpose isn't to achieve death through Judaism, it's to achieve better life. Our purpose of prayer, of serving God, is not to immerse ourselves in God so we don't come back, but to be in awe of God as well, to recognize the majesty, the awesomeness, the mystery, the uncalculatable nature of the divine, which is the source of awe, and still love it. And so here, by the way, what we're seeing is a couple of different things that we talked about in my introduction today. First of all, we're seeing the Sfirot, right? The Sfirot come from later Lurianic Kabbalah, but they're derived from the Zohar. We see the Zohar. We see early teachings in the rabbinic period, and we're about to get to Ezekiel. So right now, think of all the texts in this first paragraph that our Hasid has brought together. A Hasidic teacher starts with Deuteronomy, the Torah, continues with a text from the rabbinic texts from the Mishnah, incorporates the Zohar, a medieval text. He has now transcended, already in one paragraph, more than 2,000 years of text, which is pretty cool. And then he continues on. This is the meaning of the life force flows back and forth. This is a quote from Ezekiel. The person's life energy exists in that state of back and forth movement. It flows back into you because of the awe. Without it, you could be swallowed up in your attachment to the root, to God. This is the meaning of you shall love Adonai your God. In the midst of your great love, hold fast also to awe represented by Elohim, your God. Okay, so he is interpreting the opening of V'ahavta. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha uses two names of God. You shall love Adonai, which is the tetragrammaton, Yud He Vav He, presented here by YHWH, your God, your Elohim. Adonai, the four-letter name of God, represents the loving aspect of God. Love lovingly, but also love with awe. Love with an understanding of the immensity of the universe, of the divine. That otherwise our life force will flow entirely into God and we will be exterminated, as opposed to there being a flow back and forth. It is only with awe that we can understand that God is also the source of life from which we should be drawing life, not just the object to which we should give life. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions before we go on? Or I've totally lost you and we're down the Hasidism, Jewish mysticism rabbit hole.
I did have one question. Do the Kabbalists refer back to the people in Torah who were killed for example, I'm forgetting names. Nadib and their strange fire, for example, for being overzealous. Is that what they're referring to?
Oh, Nadav and Avihu.
Yeah, sorry.
Certainly, that could be an example. Oh, am I sharing the wrong screen? I apologize. You may not see this one. Here, let's
yeah, it's been confusing.
It's been confusing. I apologize. Thank you, Bob, for pointing that out. Try this. That is what I've been talking about. All right, that should be much less confusing. So just to, I apologize, that's terrible. So here's the quote from Deuteronomy. Here's the paragraph we just read with the quote from Mishnah, Right here, pray for the welfare of the government. The interpretation that we should pray for the wholeness of this, the 10th Sfirah, the quote from the Zohar, and then the quote from Ezekiel. And
it's more meaningful now.
I apologize. Despite my attempts to be technically capable, I occasionally make mistakes.
Nobody's perfect.
Amen.
That was a bit too much mysticism.
Yeah.
A lot to work towards. Okay. So, but Mike, you point out a good point. So the counterexample, the failure of loving too much is really the story that you mentioned, which is Nadav and Avihu, who are Aaron's sons, who at the instance of the dedication of the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert, they bring their own free will offering and they are burned up by God. And there is absolutely a mystical tradition that says they successfully integrated with God, that was in fact their goal. The problem is, it's not the goal of Jewish mysticism. The goal of Jewish mysticism is not to lose ourselves in God, right? We don't want to be swallowed up in our attachment to the root. Rather, we want to somehow, in some way, end up being fueled by our love. And the only way we can be fueled by our love to have a give and take is to be in awe of the source. To understand the immensity of the source is to also understand that we cannot possibly succeed by immersing ourselves in it. There has to be a boundary, a give and take. Otherwise, we end our own life. Larry?
Sorry I'm late, but I see the word awe and I think of Yom Kippur, the days of awe. Are we using the same word related between here and the High Holy Days?
Absolutely. So one of the key elements that we lose in English is the relatedness of certain concepts. In Hebrew, the word to see and the word to fear use the same root. So truly seeing something that is amazing is to be in awe of it. And this would be a better translation of the phrase that often ends up as to be God-fearing. That in fact, what the Torah is probably saying is better articulated as to be in awe of God as opposed to be God-fearing. However, again, because Hebrew has a limited vocabulary. Biblical Hebrew has a tiny number of words, no more than a lexicon of 5,000 to 7,000 words, which is minuscule, right? A basic English dictionary has 90,000 words in it. And so this tiny vocabulary needs to be used very broadly to express a lot of different ideas for us English speakers. And so context matters. And I think it's best to talk about the awe that you're talking about. And it is the same root for Yamim Noraim, the days of awe. The Resh Aleph is the root for both seeing and to be in fear of and to be in awe of. So yes. Thank you. Okay. Now, back to a little mysticism here. Now we know that Malchut is composed of both love and awe. This is the meaning of pray for the wholeness, for the shalom of Malchut. That it comprised, and now I'll open up the other page. It'll be much more helpful then. I apologize and switch share. If I can find it. Hold on. Here, we'll stop this and stop that. Sorry for the technical difficulties today. And hopefully this one, no, not that one. There we go. Okay. And
While you're getting it, can I make a comment?
of course.
So that thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might. If they had added the word "and with awe" in your psyche, it would have been better. It would have been better.
I love that, Ethel. You're right. And what you're seeing is the opening in the text that Jews have always taken. Part of our challenge as contemporary Jews is what you've just expressed, that if we only read V'ahavta, you shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your being, without commentary, we get a single-dimensional understanding of Judaism.
And of love.
And of love. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's unfair, really, because think of where most Jews encounter Jewish thinking. Most Jews encounter Jewish thinking in Jewish prayer. But Jewish prayer is not structured as a teaching moment.
Right.
It's structured to be like a vitamin, something we take in the habit to sustain us between times. The reality of Judaism should be happening between the times we pray. Friday night and Saturday prayer services are not meant to be the only Jewish times of the week. They're meant to be the coming together to remind us of some things that we're working on the rest of the week. So when this scholar says, and love Adonai your God means love with both love and awe, because it's implied in the two names of God there, that should be the conversation that we had before we even start recognizing that we need to say V'ahavta twice a day.
It also doesn't carry over into your love for your fellow man or for your partner. That love is different, or maybe not. Maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe there should be a little bit of awe in how you feel about your fellow man and about the person that you love so much.
This is also a wonderful comment, Ethel. The love in V'ahavta is commanded. And our love of our neighbor is also commanded. But the love of the person we live with is not.
Right.
It's developed over time.
Right.
Except for those of us who might have experienced love at first sight. And again, it's all the same word, but it's different manifestations. The command to love God is going to feel different than the love that we feel for our child, or the love that we feel for the person that we have fallen in love with. These are, and all three of those are different.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to express a lot with one word.
It's also to take another one of your subjects that we've lost lately. This seems like it ties into I and thou. I mean, the feeling the thou as a whole person and not just another thing is being a bit in awe of him. Not taking him just as a part of your life, but being an equal.
And so then we flip this. These are three different types of love, but how are each of these different types of love informing the other? Is the love that we have for a child needing more in the way of awe for the miraculous nature of the child, so that we can see the child as their own manifestation of of godliness, of miraculousness. And so that we are in awe of the child's individuality away from us, and not so much loving that the child is a reflection of us.
Mm-hmm.
On the spectrum, those lead us into different types of problems. Similarly, as Ethel, you sort of added the aha moment. Maybe we ought to be more in awe of the person we are in love with, and that love and awe go hand in hand in that.
Yes. Well, just the ability to experience a love that you have for someone deeply is an awesome experience if you stop and think about it. But of course, most of the time we don't.
Well, we don't have a lot of time to stop and think. And part of the challenge that Judaism is asking us with Shabbat at the center is not just to stop and think once a week, but to
Right.
figure out how to incorporate a reflective moment into all of our time. So that, and that's what we're going to get to here as well, believe it or not. So it continues, for without that fear, the Mishnah goes on to teach, one person would devour their neighbor alive. Neighbor here refers to the Blessed Holy One, to God. Our life force would be devoured by the root, the source of all things. Therefore, pray for awe as we have taught. The more we are aware of God's greatness, the more we are in need of awe to hold us back from being consumed out of existence. The better we know God, the more caution we need because we might be lost in God. Similarly, the better we know a person, the more caution we need to not be lost in our love for the person.
Yes.
The angels, who are so powerfully aware of God's greatness, are granted an extra measure of awe and fear, so much so that a river of fire pours forth from their perspiration before the fear of God and divine grandeur. All this so that their existence will not be negated. Angels are called the brothers of Israel. They're also referred to as standing because they do not move from one rung to another. Here we see so this is at the heart of a lot of Jewish thinking. The angelic closeness to God precludes them from being fully God's partners because they are too close to God. They are incapable of doing all that people do because they have an extra measure of awe and fear. In fact, when we read the opening to Genesis, where it says, let us make humans in our image and in our likeness, those two items are listed separately because in one commentator's idea, angels only get one of those. Angels only get the ability to impact the world, which is divine. But angels do not get the ability to choose. Angels must do what God says. They are emanations, they are direct actors on behalf of God, but people can choose. We can both make an impact in the world, we both are effective agents, but only people like God get to choose. So here we see that the angels' closeness to God is actually a demotion in their ability to do in the world. Finally, the commentator here concludes, this is the meaning of when a Levite comes forth. Remember we started with that?
Yes.
This all started with a quote from Deuteronomy about a Levite coming forth from the gates. One who cleaves to the blessed Creator, for the word Levite means to accompany, as in the verse, this time my husband will accompany me, yilveh me, referring to intimate union. Okay, so this requires a little explanation. This verse from Genesis is Leah's naming of her son Levi. And her son Levi is the the namesake for the Levite tribe. Now, why is she giving this name to Levi, to Levi? It is not, as many people think, because it sounds like the word heart, but it is not. It's a different root. It's not lamed vet, or lamed bet, it's lamed vav. And it is to accompany. And Levi is Reuven, Shimon, Levi, the third of Leah's sons. And Leah is still hoping that Jacob will pay attention to her, right? So her son is Reuven. See, I have a son, maybe he will notice me. Her second son is Shimon. See, maybe he will listen to me. Her third son is Levi. Maybe my son will accompany me. And it is only her fourth son, Yehuda, where she finally gives thanks and stops focusing on Jacob. Yehuda means to be grateful. And so here, so the Levite is one who accompanies. It is the same word that we use for accompanying a corpse, levaya, which is one of the terms for a funeral, because we are accompanying the person to their final resting place. And so then we get into this detail of what does it mean to accompany God, one who cleaves to the blessed Creator. The Levites are those who are closest to God, those who accompany God. And to cleave to God is a very important idea in Hasidism. This cleaving has a Hebrew term called divekut, to adhere to cohese with the divine, to come as close as we can. And here we see that that the teacher is advocating, this is what we can do like a Levite does. Because again, the teaching here is not about the Levite. The whole point of the Hasidic teaching is to take esoteric Kabbalistic ideas, use the Torah as a jumping off point, and give us a usable teaching. So from one of your gates, from within this world. So he's reading, the commentator here is reading the entire verse now in code. When a Levite comes forth, meaning when we cleave closely to God, from within this world, from one of the gates, from this world, coming filled with desire, coming only with love and passion to the place Adonai has chosen to serve the Creator. So the bold points here are the quotes, and the unbolded are the interpretation. Then the Levite shall serve in the name of Adonai your God, the two names referring to love and awe both together. The Levite shall serve like all his brother Levites who stand before Adonai. These are the angels, his brothers, who serve standing in great awe, so they will not be consumed. He should do the same, for with love alone, a person too could be wiped out of existence. We have to take the lesson of the angels of standing in awe to temper our love and enthusiasm when we try to come close to God. We cannot allow ourselves to be consumed by a zeal. And part of the challenge that the Hasids are coming up with is they teach that if only we could adhere, come close to God in every moment, we can elevate every moment. If only I can treat even the most mundane of my interactions as an opportunity to bring a little bit more God into the moment. If only I can have a holier interaction with my bus driver, or with the person at the checkout counter, or with a person that I greet on the street. If only I can elevate that moment, I can bring more godliness in the world, into the world. However, here the Hasidic teacher is offering a caveat, a little bit of contraction, but don't allow that goal to consume us either, because we could be consumed by being too loving in that moment and not being in awe of the moment, not being in awe of the impact, not being in awe of what the other person might think of my attempting to elevate our interaction. Think about the difference, as I'm sure all of us have encountered, between somebody who takes a moment to thank the person, I don't know, at the supermarket who's checking us out and says, you know, really, I appreciate it. It's good to see you today. Thank you. And then moves on. Because of course they're working. As opposed to the person who sits there and says, wow, it's so great that you're here. Tell me about yourself. And in that over expression of love, suddenly this person is not in fact respecting that the checkout person has other things to do. And this is, it's a wonderfully practical and idealistic teaching. Accompany God. Find the extra holiness in every moment on the one hand. On the other hand, don't disrespect the godliness all around us that isn't us. Don't over immerse ourselves in it, because to do so is to lose awe for all of the amazingness that's around us. We need to be motivated by both.
May I say something?
Please.
While you were speaking, I had a flash of Kahlil Gibran and his description of, I guess it's marriage and loving, with the two tracks. I see them as like railroad tracks where you're together and you cleave, but you don't lose yourself in the other.
Absolutely. And you can see that Rabbi Art Green offers us a caveat here, right? He offers us his 21st century explanation of the 18th century text.
The next paragraph.
Our task as a devotee is to touch the moment of self-negation in our great love of God, but not let it sweep us away. This is the classic stance of Hasidism, balancing an openness to mystical experience and a commitment to worldliness. These writers have been to that inner place where the self vanishes, but they understand that the more urgent task is that of return and living in the world. Awe is a valuable tool to keep our feet planted in this world where we still have work to do. And
that's good.
Yeah, so we are struck constantly by an attempt to find balance in things. And the human temptation, not just Jewish, but human temptation, is to think that we can somehow come up with some singular answer and then we're done. If only we get to this point, then we don't have to make any more effort. If only we can accomplish this thing, then we are done with doing this activism or this advocacy. We will finally get to whatever ideal we're aiming for. The Jewish realism in Jewish mysticism, and it's ironic that we have to rethink this, because we're so accustomed to the idea that religiosity and piety look like monasticism and separation from the world, when in fact the Jewish theological, mystical, spiritual path is integrated. We have to keep our feet planted in the world where we still have work to do. And that means that our idealism must be put in terms of accomplishment in the world. And accomplishment in the world must be seen as small in place of the massiveness of the project. And so that each of these ideas, the love that motivates us to care for people, and the awe for how we are merely small partners in that, and Then again, as we talked about sort of in another session, the balance between ego and humility, that what I do has an impact, must have an impact, and yet it's still a small thing. And I must see those things as complementary. That the smallness is important because I see myself in context with everything else. And the importance of my act is important because I must see myself as an effective agent. In the same way that I must act lovingly, but not be lost in the love. I must accept that, as Mike pointed out, from a Martin Buber perspective, that my love for those around me must be tempered by my awe that those around me are massively wondrous, miraculous individuals that I only have begun to understand, and that my love must respect them, not smother them.
They're no less than me.
They are greater than me in ways that I have yet to figure out.
There's also a parallel here to Marshall McLuhan's Media is the Message. The process is really the thing to put effort for, not to aim towards something, not to get there. The goal is not the process, not the result. Final result is what you're trying for.
And we are a process-oriented people. One of my favorite teachings in Judaism is that the 5 books of Moses are all about journeying and not about arriving.
It's just the preface.
Yeah.
And because it turns out the arrival is a lot harder than we thought. We never get the land of Israel right. We don't form a perfect monarchy. We don't form a beloved community. We don't find and create a just society for everybody. We fail miserably at the practice of ruling a country.
They're still trying.
And
Yeah.
On all levels. And in this week, and I don't know how much of the Democratic Convention all of you have tuned into, we are seeing laid out a vision for our community. Merely the roll call last night was an idealistic hope for the America that could be.
It was fabulous, I thought.
It was fabulous. Think about the representation in that roll call.
Yeah.
And Native Americans, people in territories who don't have full representation, who may or may not have full ability to be American citizens and get their rights, who are nonetheless standing up and offering their votes as part of a major American party's process. This is love. This is the love that we are expressing here. This is the ideal. And let's just say the rubber is going to hit the road when we try to turn that love with awe into practice. Because the practice is much harder. Much harder to create a society that shows the respect for all of those people. It's easy to say, I love somebody. It's hard to say, I'm willing to fight for a policy that treats us all better. And the Democratic Convention, love it or hate it, watch it or ignore it, is an expression of a number of people's hopes for the way our community could look. And we are at a crossroads, quite blatantly illustrated by former Governor John Kasich's standing at a crossroads on Monday night, which I think was hitting us on the head with it. But nonetheless, we are at a crossroads, and that crossroads is whether or not we will choose to take the risk of actually becoming the democracy that we say we are. Because it is a risk. It is a risk to say that we will allow our democracy to be guided by people who are not white. Because if we are going to do that, then in 2042 or sooner, we will become a non-majority white country. And if that's the case, for us not to be apartheid, meaning a minority ruling with greater rights over a majority, we are going to have to take this risk of finally, in fact, creating equal rights for everyone. And it is a risk. And if you want to ask the most dangerous follow-up question on that, what does Israel do in the same situation?
They're in it already.
Yes. The Israeli question is how to be a democracy and still be Jewish.
Mm.
Because Israel has great awe, great respect, one might say great fear, for what happens should Israel be dominated by a non-Jewish majority. There is no doubt that were every person in the land that Israel currently rules, in the West Bank and Israel, because Israel does not rule the Gaza Strip, given the right to vote, that the leaders elected by Palestinians currently living in the West Bank would not be friendly to Jews living in Israel. No doubt. A one-state solution is a dissolution, if it is a democratic state, of the Jewishness of Israel. So why does Israel need to be Jewish, but America not need to be white?
Interesting question.
And here we could fall on some of the other Jewish texts in our history. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? If not now, when, said Hillel.
Right.
If I am not for myself, who will be for me? The United States is the oldest democracy in the world, but also one of the worst caste systems in the world. And the caste system that we have here is contrary to the expressed, explicit principles of the United States.
And of democracy.
That we have built our country on the oppression of people over the last 400 years is against the expressed principles. The only way Abraham Lincoln could put forward emancipation was by claiming it was contrary to what we said in both the Declaration of Independence and the preamble to the Constitution. He used those as founding documents and founding principles to attempt to undo, at that point, what was only 270 years of oppression. Now, however, in Israel, the express purpose of Israel is to give a place of safety to Jews. And therefore, part of its principle is to be Jewish. Part of its principle also to be democratic and pluralistic.
That's in their constitution.
It is. Well, in the Declaration of Israeli Independence, Israel doesn't have a constitution.
Yes, to be a Jewish state.
Right. The only way to be a democracy in a Jewish state is to make sure that the majority of your residents are Jewish.
Mm.
Or the majority of your voting residents are Jewish.
Yes, yes.
I don't think any of us would be pro the integration of all of the Palestinian territories into Israel and the denial of all Palestinians' voting rights. No reasonable Zionist is for that. And so a reasonable pro-Israel person needs to figure out how to craft a country that will stay majority Jewish in a way that white Americans hoping to keep America white majority don't have the same issue, because that's to maintain the dominant caste's domination at the expense of the very principles that our country is supposedly founded on. But I didn't mean to get political, but if now you see what I've been reading. I just finished Isabel Wilkerson's cast, The History of Our Discontents, which is an unbelievable book. And if you haven't read Isabel Wilkerson, her first book, which is also absolutely astounding, The Warmth of Other Suns, which is a wonderful personal history of the Great Migration. I highly recommend it, but her new book is stunning.
She was interviewed the other night on one of the channels. I don't remember which.
All over the place promoting her book.
Yeah.
I will leave you with a couple of observations from the book that we should all take note of. When the Nazis in the 1930s began to write laws to exclude Jews, to create an exclusionary system in Nazi Germany, they looked to American law. They studied the American system of oppression of African Americans in order to create their own system. And they, in fact, decided that they could not go as far as we do here. For example, most American states had a one-drop rule with regard to African American ancestry, meaning if one had one drop of African blood, one was designated African American and therefore oppressed. And the Nazis could not do that with regard to Jewish heritage. Not only that, they had trouble coming up with laws that were as restrictive as the miscegenation laws in American states that prohibited marriage and sex between people of different races. They eventually came around to it, but they thought it was too difficult to implement to begin with. The other thought that I offer us is, in the wake of World War II, what happened to Hitler? Hitler shot himself in his bunker, and when he was dragged out by the Allied troops, they burned his corpse, and the place where his bunker was and his corpse burned are now a parking lot in Berlin. They have literally been paved over. Think of what the United States of America did with the leaders of the Civil War.
Built statues and monuments.
Not only that, Robert E. Lee became the president of a major university, and his tomb is a monumental memorial to this day. Jefferson Davis retired to a plantation in Mississippi. The people who fought for slavery in this country were lauded as heroes, and to whom did the United States government pay reparations? To slave owners. The symbols of the Confederacy were accepted in this country up until the last couple of years. To display a Nazi symbol in Germany is a crime. In Germany, there are no memorials to Nazis. There are memorials to the victims of the Nazis. There are reparations paid to Israel. And with that, I ask us, love and awe. Where is the love and awe in the way we practice our behavior in the public sphere today? Something to aim for. Thank you all so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
And next week, I have on the slate Jewish sources on anti-racism, but I'm going to be talking a lot about that in September at services. So if any of you have a topic that you'd like me to talk about next week, let me know. You can let me know up until Tuesday evening, and I will attempt to prepare something for it. Linda, you unmuted. Did you have something you wanted to ask?
No, I just want to say thank you.
Oh, well, thank you too.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Be in touch. I look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.